Here we go. Well, hi everybody, and welcome to Pushing the Limits. This week I have a superstar who is a good friend of Mark Devine, Commander Mark Devine. You may have heard previous weeks on my podcast. We have Kirk Parsley with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I feel very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm still here, but I'm happy to be sharing this airspace with you, or whatever it is, sharing satellite waves.
I'm really super excited. I've heard you a number of times on Mark's show, and just thought, oh, I have to get you on because you're such an expert. We're going to dive into a little bit into your background, but you're an absolute sleep expert. So I'm really keen to help my audience with their sleep and their sleep patterns and all of that sort of good stuff. But before we get into that, we were just chatting about genetics and endurance. So give us a bit of a background. You've been a Navy SEAL, you've been in the military, in the naval military. So give us a bit of background on yourself, Dr. Parsley.
Yeah, so ironically, I actually dropped out of high school. I was a terrible student my whole life. Didn't have any interest in school, and you know, after you don't do well for long enough, you just convinced yourself that you can't do well, and so you're just, yeah, I'm just dumb. I can't do it. So I was always very physical, very athletic. Just fortunate, like genetic lottery. I won, to just be sort of an athletic and strong guy. And it came pretty easy to me, but I worked hard at it because I didn't do school, or so. But I dropped out of high school to join the military and do the hardest training in the world, and that was what the SEAL training was supposed to be. Is the toughest training in the world. I'm like, well, I'm going to go do that. Yeah. So I went to do that, and this was way a long time ago. This is 1988. So. It was long before anybody knew what SEALs were.
Yeah, you weren't famous then.
Yeah, they didn't have the notoriety they have now for sure. When I would come home from the Navy and tell people I was a SEAL, they're like, "What do you mean? Like you work for SeaWorld or something, or like what do you do?" Kind of. So so I went through SEAL training. Obviously, I made it through SEAL training. I became a SEAL. That was pre 9/11, obviously, so we didn't have the combat that the SEALs of this generation do, so it's not really comparable. We were still mainly working in Southeast Asia, doing kind of just police work and training other militaries, and I did 3 deployments. It was really kind of the same thing over and over and over again, because there was no combat. So you just did the same training, and then you deployed, and then you came home and you did the same training, you deployed. And I was like, maybe I'll go do something else. Thought I would be, I was dating a woman who would become my wife, and she was getting a master's in physical therapy, and I was reading her textbooks on deployment to make myself a better athlete. And I thought maybe I could be a physical therapist. And so I started volunteering at a physical therapy facility in San Diego called San Diego Sports Medicine Center. And it had every kind of healthcare provider you could possibly imagine in this building. It was just this healthcare mecca. This is the most holistic thing I've ever seen to this day. And I decided pretty quickly I didn't want to be a physical therapist, but I didn't know what else I wanted to do. And, but I got to follow the podiatrist around, and acupuncturists, and massage therapists, and athletic trainers, and strength and conditioning coaches, and the orthopedists, and the family practice, and the sportsmen. Like, I just got to follow them around and see how everybody worked. And there were a group of young doctors there who are probably only 5 or 6 years older than me, and they were saying, well, you should go to medical school. And I was like, pump the brakes, kiddo. Like, I didn't even graduate high school. I'm not getting into medical school. And then the senior doctor overhears the conversation, and he comes out of the office and he says, Kirk, the question isn't, can you get in? The question is, would you go if you got in? And I said, of course I'd go if I got in. He said, well, there you have it. So he sort of shamed me into going to medical school. I'm like, yeah, of course I'd go. So I studied hard and got really good grades. And then when it came time to apply for medical school, this is pre-internet, so you had to go to the bookstore and get your Kaplan book review and look and see what schools you're competitive for. And when I was going through one of those books, I found out that the military had their medical school.
Wow.
The military was a closed chapter in my mind. I'd done that. Something that I figured I'd always do in my life, but it was never meant to be my whole life. And so I'd done that, and figured I was done. But I was already married, I already had kids. And so it's like, well, the military will pay me to go to medical school, or I can pay someone else to go to medical school, and my wife can work while we're in medical. And so I made enough to support my family and go to medical school for free. Wow. And then the payoff in the military is they'll train you to do anything, but you have to give them years of service in that job. So once you finish your medical training, you have to be a doctor for the military for 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so I figured, I'll get back to the SEAL teams. I'll go pay something back to the community that helped me, was hugely formidable in who I became in my life. And went back to the SEAL teams, really well prepped to do sports medicine and orthopedics. And I knew quite a bit about nutrition and performance and strength and conditioning. Like I was pretty sure I had the exact pedigree. And when I got there, they'd just gotten the money to build a sports medicine facility, which was actually, their vision was exactly what I told you that I worked in college. Like that's exactly what they wanted to build. And I'm like, I got this. So they put me in charge of building this out. And, I was a significant part of us hiring everyone we hired. So we hired our first strength and conditioning coach, our first nutritionist, our first, PT, our first everything. Like we built our own sports medicine facility, and then we had orthopedics was coming through every week, and they would do rounds there, and we'd have pain rounds, pain management rounds come through. We had an acupuncturist coming through, and we hired all these people from like the Olympic Training Center and like professional sports teams and the best colleges. And so we had all these brilliant people who knew way more than I did about what they do.
Sort of went from there to there.
Yeah. And so at that point, I was the dumbest person around, right? Because we had all these experts in every little niche that I knew this much about. We hired experts who knew that much about. And so in the military, when you're the dumbest guy, they put you in charge, right? And say, well, you manage this, right? And so then I'm managing all these people who know more than I do, however that works. But my office was in this facility that we built. And the SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that the worst thing that they could possibly imagine happen to them is you take them out of their job and you put them on a bench, so to speak, right? Because they're injured or they need some help, so they can't work. It's the worst thing. Yeah. So when they see a healthcare provider, they just lie because they don't want to
be taken out.
They will take money out of their pocket and go into the city and find a doctor to treat them, so that the doctor at work doesn't know, so they don't get put on the sideline. But because I was a SEAL, and because there were still a lot of there's still a lot of SEALs at the SEAL team. It was close enough to my time. There were still a lot of SEALs at the team who I worked with, and I trained with and deployed with, and so who knew me, and I had a good reputation. And so they trusted me, and they come in my office and they say, hey, let me tell you what's going on with me. And they reported this litany of symptoms that didn't have any sort of pattern that I could recognize. Right. And so, they were saying that their motivation was low, that they were very moody, that they couldn't concentrate, they're super forgetful, their energy was low, their body composition was shifting, they felt slower and dumber and colder. None of them were sleeping very well. They're all taking sleep drugs. Wow. They had low sex drive. They had a lot of joint pain, a lot of inflammation. And I didn't have the slightest idea. I'm like, and I don't know, it sounds like you're obese and 65. Like but I'm looking at you and you're not, so I don't know what's going on. Wow. And so I just started testing everything I could possibly test. I tested like literally 98 blood markers. They were given 17 vials of blood. I was just shotgun approach, just test everything and see what's abnormal. And I started seeing some patterns. And they had really low anabolic hormones, so like DHEA and testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, pregnenolone, like all of that was low. And they'd have really high inflammatory markers. They really had poor insulin sensitivity for how healthy I knew they were and how well they ate and how much they exercised. It was still within the normal range, but it wasn't.
Yeah, not like
everything was in the normal range, but everything that should be really high was just like barely in the normal range, and everything that should be really low was just barely inside of that range, you know. And so they didn't have disease, and I was a medical doctor, so I had learned how to recognize and treat disease, and they didn't have disease. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do? So that led me to having to train with outside providers, and fortunately at that time the SEALs did have the reputation. They'd already done all this amazing thing. This is 2009, so I think they had already shot bin Laden at that point. So I could call anybody, right? I'd watch somebody's TED talk, or I'd read their book, or I'd see them lecture, and I'd just call them and say, hey, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL team. So could I come train with you? Could I consult with you? Can I ask you some questions? And everybody was generous and said, absolutely. So I got to learn a lot really quickly. I'd take a lot of leave from work and just go sit in these guys' clinics for 4 or 5 days and just pick their brain and go see patients with them and take notes and learn. And then I just call them every time I had a question. And I got to learn really quickly. I just like this team of experts who knew everything about the alternative sort of world. And so I was trying to treat people for adrenal fatigue, and I was trying to treat people for, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, which were obvious from what was going on. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And about 100 patients into it, and probably after 30 guys came in, I could have told everybody. I could have just said, sit down, I'll tell you what you're going to tell me. And I could have just routed off. It's so similar.
Wow.
And about 100 guys into it, it's embarrassing it took so long, but I remember this guy telling me that he took Ambien every night, which you guys call still knocks, I think, right?
Yep.
And I was married to an Aussie, so I know a lot. I mean, I know you're not an Aussie, but like I know about that, a little bit about your worlds and your language. So anyway, I remember putting a note in the margin going, it seems like a lot of guys taking Ambien. Right?
Yeah.
And then I go back through everybody's records. 100% of the guys who had been in my office were taking Ambien.
Wow.
So I thought, well, maybe that's
the key.
An issue, right? So let me go look at the side effects of Ambien. And it was a fairly new drug. And the pharmaceutical industry, they get to cherry pick their data. So really, they were like, "Oh, it's the safest drug ever. There's no problems." And I'm like,
repeat that.
I don't know if I believe that. But unfortunately, like every other doctor in America, I didn't know anything about sleep. I'd never had a single class on sleep in medical school. Didn't have the foggiest idea of what should be happening. I knew what's called the mechanism of action of this drug, which means molecularly, what does it do? Well, it binds GABA receptors and has an effect like GABA. It's called GABA analog. I mean, benzodiazepines are the same thing, things like Valium. And so that was about as much as I knew. And I was like, well, what is GABA doing? So then I had to go read, all right, well, what is GABA supposed to do? And then you can't really understand that without understanding what's actually going on in sleep. So then I had to learn about sleep physiology and what's supposed to happen during sleep, and what are the normal shifts and changes, and what does that do? And if that doesn't happen, what sort of effects do you get? And so after studying quite a bit, I figured out, just the general Occam's razor principle. The thing with the least assumptions is literally every single symptom that these men told me about could be explained by poor sleep.
Yep.
Now, I didn't think that it would be, right? I wasn't naive.
That's simple.
But it could have been, right? So if this was definitely the most powerful thing, because being a Western doctor, I wanted to give them Cortef and raise their cortisol. I wanted to give them testosterone and raise their testosterone. I wanted to give them medication to improve their insulin sensitivity. I wanted to just go in there and do it, but I couldn't do that, right? Because you can't give SEALs medication that they're dependent upon, because then what if they go out in the field and they don't have their medication, they can't do their job, and it's a waste. So that puts people on the bench, that disqualifies people. So I couldn't do that. So I had to figure out, well, what else can I do? So like I said, the sleep this seemed like the unifying theory. So let me see about that. And this was right around the time that everybody was catching on to the importance of vitamin D3.
Yeah.
And that was associated with poor sleep. So I tested all my guys. Every one of them had low vitamin D3. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to give them vitamin D3. I'm going to fix everything. I'm going to be a hero. Everybody's going to love me. I'm the best doctor ever. And, it helped a little bit, but it wasn't everything. And then, like I said, I had this epiphany with this sleep drug. And once I learned enough about the sleep drugs, I'm like, oh, you aren't actually sleeping when you have sleep drugs. You're just unconscious.
Exactly.
Your brain is dissociated, but it's not sleep, because sleep has to have, as one of its criteria, you have to have this predictable sleep architecture. You have to be going through these sleep cycles that take you through these different stages in a predictable pattern, and it's repetitive. And it's primarily deep sleep in the beginning of the night and almost exclusively REM sleep by morning. And you have to do that transition. And if you don't do that, then it's not sleep. I mean, it can be partially sleep if you're just getting poor sleep. But I was having these guys do sleep studies, and they were coming back with 99.9% of their sleep study being stage 2 sleep, which is just the transition. It's what we call the transitional sleep phase. So it's not deep or REM.
Wow.
So they weren't really getting any of the benefit of sleep. And of course, that's an oversimplification. They're obviously getting something or they'd be dead.
Yeah.
But we don't know what they're getting, because all we know is that healthy sleep does this. And when you go through these cycles, we know these things happen. Like when you're in deep sleep, we know that's when you're the most anabolic and you're secreting your anabolic hormones like growth hormone and testosterone, and like DHEA is being ramped up, your immune system's being ramped up. We know this happens. And then we know in REM sleep what's going on in the brain, the physiological changes, forming more durable neurotracts, neurological memories, shifting things from working memory into long-term memory, pruning off useless information, these little boutons that grow on the side of your nerves that are starting to bud new information. You're like, I don't need that. And you clean up all that and get rid of waste products, and you get the brain working better. And the whole purpose of going to sleep tonight is to prepare myself for tomorrow, right? Whatever I do today, that's what my brain and body are going to think it needs to do tomorrow. It's going to use today as a template to try to make me better tomorrow at doing what I did today. And if I don't get enough sleep, if I don't get to restore, I still have to do tomorrow. And how do I do that? Well, I do it the same way you do any extra. Is I go into stress. I use my adrenal. I pump out a bunch of cortisol and DHEA, and I start robbing all my nutrients from my cells. My blood glucose is going up. I'm getting fuel sources that way. I have epinephrine and norepinephrine stimulating my brain and my tissues to be able to get energy where there's really no energy there. And then I'm going to bed with these really high stress hormones, which are supposed to be low when I sleep. And then I'm trying to sleep with high stress hormones. Then I get worse sleep. And then I need more stress hormones tomorrow. And that's what breaks people. And in fact, when you see somebody who doesn't sleep well for even 6 months, they look so much older. Why do they look older? That doesn't make sense. Like, just because they're tired, is it tired old? Well, if you think about it, you're born into this contract. You can't get around it. It's just like you're born knowing you're going to die, 100% certain you're going to die. There's also this other contract that's certain, is your body ideally works for about 16 hours and it needs 8 hours to recover. Yep. That's the way it works. Like, that's what you're born into. That's, I mean, and there's small variations there, but obviously, like, you can't get around that. And so if you don't get those 8 hours, you didn't recover from those 16 hours. And so if you think about logically, obviously when you're a kid, you need more sleep. So it's not a great example when you're really young. Kids actually sleep a lot more than 8 hours by and large, but you'll see them actually getting better every day, right? They're growing, they're getting smarter, they're getting more coordinated. You can see that every day. But if you think about, say, like once you hit 25 and your brain's fully formed and everything's, sort of static, if you could recover 100% every night and wake up the next morning as good as you were that other morning, you wouldn't age, right? There
Wow.
would be no aging because you would have recovered 100%.
Is that important?
And
yep.
so everything that you're deficient in, so if you're missing 10%, well, you're going to age, that 10%. And if you're missing a little more, you're going to age a little faster. So when you see people who haven't been sleeping well for a year, they are literally older because they've been recovering less and less every night. So there's a breakdown in their protein structures. There's a decrease in their blood supply, their peripheral vascularization. Like their tissues are aging. There's a buildup of waste products that aren't getting out, and that's toxic, and it's damaging mitochondria, and forming more senescent cells, and like all these other things, they're building up. And that every marker we have, even genetic marker, when you look at telomere length and methylation on the genes, every marker, they look older. And when you look at them, they look older. And that's why, because that's really what aging is. It's really just the absence of being able to recover 100% every night. And as we get older, we just don't repair as fast. And that's unfortunately when most people quit sleeping as much. And now that's a double, it's a double whammy there. You're getting twice the aging effect that way. And there's no reason to sleep less when you get older. That they're, it's typical, but it's not something you have to do. I've had 84-year-old women who haven't slept more than 4 or 5 hours in 20 years, and I get them to sleep 8 hours a night.
Yeah, I've got one over there who's rustling around, walking around behind me. He's 80 years old, nearly. Hey, Mum. and she's struggling with sleep in the early morning hours, and therefore, her memory and things. So I want to pick your brain on that. And actually, I mean, can I just slow you down a little bit, because we've just covered a ton of ground here.
All you told me to do is you just asked me about myself, and I just couldn't stop.
No, but you were on an absolute roll, so I didn't want to interrupt you because there was just so many things, but my brain's just going like, there's so many questions.
Yeah, that was just meant to be an overview.
Yeah, that was an overview. Now can we dive deeper into some of the weeds? Because now I understand why you've become Doc Parsley, the sleep expert, because obviously that was the biggest leverage. In other words, this is the biggest leverage point that you see. When we think of the SEALs, we sort of think of the SEALs as being, these gods of amazingness that can do everything. But what you're saying is like, these guys are pushing, because they're pushing the limits of, endurance and mental fatigue and all these things like that. So they're going to be the canaries in the gold mine in a way, because they're going to be coming up against the limits of everything. And for you to say, as an ultra marathon athlete, I've come up against the limits in certain ways, like with sleep deprivation. And, I sort of understand some of the things now that you were talking about. So you've ended up finding out that this is probably the biggest leverage point in anybody's life, basically, for their health, is their sleep. So I want people to sort of take a bit of a grip on that one. It's not necessarily the food or nutrition, it's the sleep. Would you agree? When
I first started lecturing, I used to say there were 4 pillars of health: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and then the 4th pillar, you're audience dependent. It could be mindfulness, it could be stress mitigation, it could be like community, whatever it is that kind of controls your stress hormones and your emotions and your mood and all that stuff. So, and then after a while, I just shifted. I said, there's 3 pillars sitting on the foundation of sleep, because if you take the sleep away, none of those other pillars work. There's nothing you can do. And in fact, if you exercise when you're sleep deprived, it's counterproductive, because you're not recovering. And we all know that you don't actually get better when you exercise, right? You damage yourself when you exercise, and then when you sleep, you recover and you come back stronger. You can't, when you deprive yourself of sleep, you change your entire gut biome, you change your insulin sensitivity, you change everything. So now your nutritional status doesn't work anymore, and when you don't sleep well, as I said, you increase your stress hormones. So you can do the mindfulness training and all of that stuff, and meditate and all that, but you're just going to bring yourself down maybe to where you would have been if you just slept well and didn't do any kind of training. So it's really the foundation for everything. And I say this all the time. It sounds hyperbolic, but I'm 100% convinced it's true. There's nothing that you can do nothing that will break you faster than poor sleep and poor and insufficient sleep. There's a reason we use it as an interrogation technique.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
There's a reason we break people down intentionally this way, because it depletes all your resources. it interferes with your brain function, your willpower, your problem solving, your speech, your ability to formulate plans, your motivation, your mood, everything goes almost instantaneously with one night of lack of sleep. Never mind, keep somebody up for 3 or 4 days in a row. They're just a mess. They're just an input mess. They just want you to just tell me whatever I have to do it, and I'll sleep. Like anything I can do to get sleep, and I'll do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to rip people's fingernails out and stuff. You just deprive them of sleep and say,
And that's
I'll
what
let
they
you
use in
sleep
the
if you
military.
do this.
Yeah.
And everybody will do it. And conversely, there's nothing that will improve the quality of your life and your performance faster than sleeping well. If you're an inadequate sleeper, which most people are, they don't even know they are.
Yeah.
And everybody has these 30-day challenges and 60-day challenges. I'm like, I only need 7 days. Like, give me 1 week. 1 week with sleep is your number one priority. And you do everything right, and you get 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours, at least 8.5 hours in bed every night. And you're sleeping approximately 8 hours a night. And give me that for a week. And then if you're not convinced it's the most powerful thing, just go back to whatever you're doing.
But
nobody's ever gone back.
No,
anyone ever go back.
But a lot of us, I can hear people saying, yeah, but I go to bed and I can't sleep. And I wake up at 2 a.m. and my brain's racing, and I've been told to do some meditation, and maybe it's my cortisol, and so okay, let's look now, because I think, like, if we haven't got the message across now that sleep is the number one thing that you should be prioritizing above everything, that we haven't done very well in the last half an hour. But I think but how do we sleep? How do we? What foods do we need to eat before we go to bed or not eat? What supplements can we take? You've got your sleep remedy that we'll get into a little bit. What routine can I do to optimize? What light dark cycles? All of these sorts of things that can be leverage points for us in optimizing our sleep. And how do we test that if we're actually in that deep sleep phase? What are the best tools that you've found to sort of work that out? So that was a mouthful, but yeah.
So the first thing we need to do is get away from that frenetic question right there, which is what everybody's going through in their head. But what about this? What about that? And so here's my job is to make this really simple, because simple things we can do, and the more nuanced your plan is around sleep, the more likely it is to fail. And we're doing big macro movements here. So the very first thing is what you said. I think we've already covered. The very first thing is to convince yourself that sleep's the most important thing, and to make it your priority for at least 1 week to get everything going. And when I say your priority, I mean priority, like the true meaning of that word. There's only one thing. Nothing else must one, including raising your kids and your job and your exercise routine, everything else. The most important thing, make sleep the most important thing for 1 week. And if you aren't quite convinced yet, go to PubMed or go to Google Scholar, something like this, and put in sleep and anything else you care about. Being a parent, mood, dating, sex drive, athleticism, strength, endurance, concentration, memory, I don't care. Whatever it is you care about. Strength and this, strength and business, strength and I don't care. Anything you want, read to your heart's content. It will convince you that the one good thing about sleep is that the sleep science is that it's not controversial. There's no one out there saying, oh, you don't really need to sleep, or you don't really need it. Like, everybody agrees. There's nuances in people's approach, but everybody agrees you need about 8 hours of sleep a night. And just convince yourself that it's the most important thing. Once you're there, that's the most important thing. Now, after that, recognize, okay, I'm going to make this my number one priority. Recognize that you're born to sleep. You don't need to learn anything. You need to unlearn some stuff, right? Like, you're designed to do this, and this should feel good. You should enjoy sleeping. Like, you should look forward to going to bed and waking up in the morning going, man, I feel so much better. I'm ready to go do my day. Like, this should be as easy as selling sex, but it's not. Like, people resist this forever. Like, I have no idea why. It's like, it's great. Like, why don't you like sleep? I've always liked sleep. So anyway, so then you just think, okay, when did sleep go bad for humankind? Probably in the last 70 years.
Yeah,
years.
or we got electric light.
That's about it, right? I mean, it's only been really since rural electrification, right? Since they got electricity out to everybody, that's really when it started. I mean, you look back, in America just 100 years ago, look at people's journals in the winter, they spent like 14 hours a day in bed. I mean, that's just a normal thing to do.
Wow.
So if you think about it and just say, I know this is simple, I'm going to let myself fall into it. And I'll tell you, there's all the sleep hygiene. You can get on the internet and you can find, do this, drink a hot cup of tea, drink a milk, do this, make your room really cold, make your room really dark, make your bed really soft, make your bed really hard, get a white noise machine, get rid of all the EMFs. Like a million people are going to tell you all sorts of different things to do. And I'll cut through all the BS and then you can pick and choose. So
Right.
The real answer is all of that stuff works to some extent. All of that's important to some extent. The way I work with clients is 95%, at least 95% of all the success is from lifestyle. And then all these little gadgets and mitigation tools and supplements and all this stuff, that's that other 5%, right? But it's 95% behavioral. So you just look back, how did we evolve to sleep? Nobody teaches people how to sleep, right? You're born as a baby, you sleep. So how did we sleep as adults and cultures 100 years ago? Well, when the sun went down, we fell asleep about 3 hours later and we woke up around the time the sun came up. It was pretty much that easy. Okay, so let's reverse engineer that a little bit. I think most people know that blue light is a stimulus for being awake. We don't truly have a sleeping program. If you think of it like software, we don't have any sleeping software. We just have lack of awakening software. So we have things that go on in our brain and body that make us feel awake and make us interact with our environment. And then when you take those things away, we're in what you call sleep.
Wow.
So the blue light actually has nothing to do with vision. There's nerve cells in the back of your eyes that sense blue light. That's all they do.
Yep.
And then they fire pathways back to the circadian pathways in your brain.
Yep.
Eventually the pineal, it goes to the subclavian. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then the pineal gland secretes melatonin. And melatonin is a hormone. It's the starter pistol. It initiates all these cascades. And then one of the cascades that it initiates is the production of this peptide called GABA, capital GABA, butyric acid.
Yep.
And what that does is it slows down the neocortex. So when you think of the human brain, the picture of the human brain, we all have that big wrinkly mass, it's sort of, crescent shape. That's what we call the neocortex. And that is how we interact with the world, right? All of our senses get processed in that. And then all of our movement is processed from that, right?
Yep.
So when we're asleep, all that's really different when we're asleep about, in the general sense, right? There's nuances in every neuron and every molecule, but in the general sense, there's a barrier between us and our environment is how it's phrased. But what it means is we aren't paying attention to our environment anymore. Our eyes obviously still work, right? Because you can turn on the light and you can wake somebody up. Our ears still work. You can make a noise and wake somebody up. Our sense of touch still works because you can shake somebody. They can roll into something sharp and their pain receptors will wake them up. Heat will wake them up. Cold will wake them. So we still work. Everything still works. We just aren't processing it. We aren't paying attention to it.
Yep.
And what helps us do that is GABA. So GABA saturates all of our neurons. And there's a neuron has what's called a resting potential. So there's like an electrical current in here. And when you put in enough electrical current, it goes like this and that neuron fires. And then it does whatever it does and forms pathways. Well, GABA lowers that. So now it takes more energy to make that thing fire. And you can overcome this by just putting a lot of energy into the cells. So if you've ever been exhausted, woken up exhausted, didn't get enough sleep for whatever reason, you're like, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to come home. I'm going to go straight to bed. I'm going to sleep like 12 hours a night. Right? And then your friends talk you into going out to the pub and you get a couple of drinks and you stay up to midnight. I feel fine. Yeah. And then you suffer again the next day, right?
Yep.
Because you just overcame that. So think about, and you can actually read about this because this still exists, believe it or not. There are still, I think, 35 or 45 community, like pretty large communities around the globe that have never experienced electricity, and they
So you can
live just like
study them.
live like hunter-gatherers. They go out, and the men go out and hunt, and the women pick and nurture the kids and weave, and like just what you think of, you know, cavemen doing. Like they still live like that today. And we study these people, and we did actigraphy, so it's not true sleep study, but it's just movement to know when they're likely to be asleep. And what we find is the sun goes down. Again, the blue light goes out of their eyes. It fires the brain, starts secreting melatonin. That leads to a cascade of 365 billion other chemical changes in the brain, right? But that initiation has to happen. Once that initiation is going, one of the things it does is secrete GABA, increase GABA production in lots of regions of the brain. That starts slowing the brain down. The sun goes down, they don't have electricity, right? All of the best they have is a fire. So what else happens? Their body temperature goes down. So when the sun goes down and it's dark, we can't see well at night. You can't see very far. So there's way less stimulus, right? They don't have flashing lights, they don't have loud music. So there's not much to stimulate them. So they sit around a fire, maybe if they're lucky. If not, they just sit around in the dark and they have some quiet, calm conversations, and then they drift off to sleep. That's all sleep hygiene is. That's it. Those three things.
Dark.
Decrease the blue light, decrease the stimulation to your brain, and drop your body temperature.
Drop your body temperature.
You need a cool place to sleep. One of the things that you can do to kind of speed these things up is concentrate the right nutrients in your brain. If you are going to take melatonin, you should take a very, 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 very small amount.
I wanted to ask you about that.
You just want to initiate. You don't want to put so much melatonin in your brain that your brain doesn't need to make melatonin, because then you start running into it insensitivity to melatonin. And now when you take it away, you don't have, like, you're essentially melatonin deficient because you've downregulated the receptors and your brain's not sensitive to melatonin anymore.
Can I just stop you there for 1 second, Doc? Because Dr. John Lawrence is his name, and he was on the Ben Greenfield podcast, and he's written a book about melatonin. And he argued that melatonin, interesting work, doesn't downregulate when you take melatonin, and doesn't cause that downregulation. That all the other hormones do. You know, if we take testosterone, we're going to downregulate our own testosterone. If we take whatever, he said that it didn't, and he was advocating in his book for actually, super physiological doses of melatonin. Certainly, when you do things like jet lag or whatever you're trying to reset. But also for a raft of other ailments to help with many diseases. Have you heard of his work? Or
yeah, I'm familiar with him and his work.
Yeah, what's your take on that? Because I was like, I don't know.
So I disagree, obviously.
Yeah,
but
that's what I want to know.
But specifically, so what he's talking about, 90% of his work is about the antioxidant principle.
Yeah, as an antioxidant. Yep.
It's a great antioxidant. The studies that he's quoting saying that melatonin doesn't downregulate, we don't know for sure. It's like maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The only way we would know is if we could actually drop a catheter into somebody's brain and sample their brain, the fluid in their brain 24 hours a day, and study this over months. And so we can't say for sure. We can do animal models. Again, it's hard to quantify because from the time the sun goes down, which is about 3 hours before you'll fall asleep, to the entire time you've slept until the sun comes up, you're looking at somewhere between 11 and 12 hours. From in that entire time, your brain will only produce 5 to 6 micrograms of melatonin.
Tiny amount.
So how do we study, right? It's really hard to study, and you think of it like in a mouse model, how much smaller the quantities are we're looking at that point, and the concentration of melatonin in each region of the brain is not the same. It depends on some cells in the brain can actually be stimulated by melatonin, and some are, like it's different. And same with GABA. Like GABA doesn't go to every region of the brain because it can stimulate regions of the brain. But what we do know, and so first, I always go with
ear on the
we don't know anything.
Yeah.
We have research that makes us believe certain things are likely to be true based on the best science we have right now. So we don't know anything. And I believe that to be true about everything in science. Just wait a week, it might change. But what we do know is that every other hormone does this.
Yes.
So if it doesn't do this, it's the only hormone in the body that doesn't do it.
Right.
Pretty unlikely. But what we do know with 100% certainty is that it does downregulate melatonin receptors.
Right.
If you take away melatonin receptors, if I normally have 10 melatonin receptors and I go down to just having one, well, now even if I'm saturated with melatonin, I only have one.
It's not going to get
I have to have this super saturation for this one receptor to do all this work. And if I go down to normal physiologic levels of melatonin and this one receptor, and it's just getting an occasional melatonin coming by, it's no different. It doesn't matter that whether I'm not producing enough or I don't have enough receptors, it's the same end result, because you have to have melatonin bind the receptor and get pulled into the cell to have its function.
So can I ask one question there? Like, so for elderly who from what I understand in my basic research on melatonin is that their melatonin production goes down with age, and therefore they could benefit from melatonin supplementation. Is that a thing, or is, again,
I agree. And so what happens is the pineal gland calcifies.
Yes, yeah.
Just like our arteries and like every vessel, everything in our body calcifies, right? That's sort of aging one, which is sort of one of the characteristics of aging.
Majors, yeah.
Yeah. And so it calcifies, and you do almost certainly secrete less melatonin, right? And again, the only way we would know is to drop a catheter into somebody's brain. But you can, I'm not saying that you shouldn't take melatonin at all. I'm just saying you shouldn't take supraphysiologic. So like his example of when you're speaking about the melatonin work earlier, right? His example is, well, this is great antioxidant. And if I do these super physiologic amounts, there's all these benefits to it. Well, if I give you 10 times the amount of testosterone that your body ordinarily has, you're going to feel fantastic.
Yeah, you're also going to kill
Does
your
that
liver.
make it good? Yeah, right? If I give you something that secretes a bunch of norepinephrine and norepinephrine, like cocaine, and you have this huge rush of norepinephrine, you feel fantastic, and you're super productive, and your brain's really sharp. Does that make that a good idea? No. I don't think so. I don't deal with anything super physiologic. Again, I'm a behaviorist. I'm like, 95% of all your health is going to come from reapproximating the way you evolved. This body has taken hundreds of thousands of years to adapt to this planet. And now we're just like, we're smarter. Like, I'm a 35-year-old biohacker. I read a bunch of books. I know I can do it better than the, it's ridiculous.
So true.
We know, like,
but can we augment?
We know like 2/3 of 5/8 of, we don't know anything about the body. We know nothing. And
but can we augment for people, like, like, we also know that people tend to die, like, if we're wanting to extend our, health span and our lifespan, health span mainly, can we, like with hormone replacement therapy, there's the raging argument, should you be on hormone replacement therapy? Should you not? If you're wanting to optimize, now there's downsides, and you need to understand your genetics, and you need to understand all of those aspects, but there is benefits for us to taking testosterone or, DHEA or these things in the right physiological doses of say a 30-year-old. Like, I'm 52. I want to be at the level that I was, say, at 30, 35. I understand my genetics. I know where my risk factors are. I can keep an eye on all of that sort of stuff. But then can I augment that so that I live and function longer? Because that, I think, is the core question here, is how do we optimize? Yes, we've developed like cavemen, but they die at 70, 80 as well. And then, can we extend that with the knowledge that we currently have?
Well, so, I don't ever promise anybody that I can make them live longer. I say,
well, no, yes,
you might live longer from this. If you think about it, you think about what I first talked about, what sleep does, right? And if we could catch up every night, we wouldn't age.
Yeah.
So what are we doing when we're doing things like hormone replacement therapy, or we're doing metabolomics, and we're doing all sorts of supplementation around that, or we're doing artificial things like hyperbarics and near and far IR and ice baths, and doing all these things to stimulate the production of other things. And of course, now we have antibiotics, and we have like all sorts of treatments to keep people from dying as young from certain diseases. So certainly we should be able to either like probably add years to your life, but if not, definitely we can add life to your years, right?
Yeah,
so like if you're going to die at 80 either way, like one version of this, you could die hiking Mount Kilimanjaro at 80. Another one, you die in a wheelchair in a nursing home. So I don't know. And the question is, we even with the longevity work that people are doing, like really smart guys like Sinclair and all these guys, they're doing all of these things with NMN, and they're doing all these things with, clearing senescent cells. We're doing all these things with peptides. And, I give my patients peptides for certain things. I don't know nearly as much about this longevity stuff as I would like to. And we're reversing aging genetically, right? We're going in there and saying, like, actually over the course of a year, with a lot of work, a lot of effort, right? A lot of peptides, a lot of modalities, like really focusing on your lifestyle and doing everything ideally, we can actually probably reverse your genetic age a little bit. Are we actually reversing your age? Don't know. We made your telomeres longer, decrease the methylation on your genes, and those are markers for age. Does that reverse it? We don't really know, right? It's like we've
been around long enough to work it out.
Right. And it's like
it seems
it's like omega-3s. It's like with omega-3s, we know that if your omega-3s are this, then we know that certain things go this way. Well, but if we supplement your omega-3s, is that the same as you having that nutritionally? Or vitamin D3, is that the same? We don't know. We're thinking that it probably is. And we're thinking if we're reversing the markers we know for genetic aging, that's making you genetically younger. But maybe there's some totally different information in there that around aging that we don't know anything about yet, right? Yeah, that's possible too. And I think from what I know about you, you probably agree with me. I think epigenetics is more important than genetics anyway.
Yeah.
You have certain genetics, and you change half a dozen things about your day, and your epigenetics are totally different. Like if you short yourself 2 hours of sleep, you change 735 different epigenetic markers from just 2 hours. And like you're going like all your pro-inflammatory ones are the ones turning on, and all of your anabolic ones are the ones turning off. And again,
so it's still our biggest leverage point, isn't it, for aging?
And it's still crazy complex. I think that you can decipher what 735 changes in epigenetics mean. Like, and like we have some ideas of what certain things. How does all that work in synchronicity? Like, I love your approach. Even though we're the smartest animal on this planet, we still have a very feeble mind when it comes to understanding the complexity of our bodies. I mean, we can't understand the complexity of the planet, much less our bodies. And life is just this amazingly complex thing. We don't have systems in our bodies. We divide the body up into systems as a way to learn it, so that we can systematically learn and we can test about the learning. But the body doesn't work in systems.
I have such issue with that too, because I think the way that the medical model breaks us all down.
Right. Like the reductionist model doesn't work for life. And if you think about, most of biology is purely descriptive. All it is like we've come up with better and better ways to test things and look at things, and then we can describe what's going on. We don't know how to manipulate it most of the time. And if we do, it's really clumsy, and it's causing 500 other changes because we wanted to flip this one switch this way. And then what are the downstream effects? Oh, we don't know. We'll find out in like 30 years after 100,000 people go through this. So like it's really clumsy. So I don't know. Can I make somebody live longer? I'd never make that claim. But can I make people feel and perform better? Absolutely. Like do it all the time. And me personally, like you're saying, I just approximate youth. There are arguments, there are people out there saying, there are people saying, well, these hormones will cause this or that. And I'm like, okay, if high estrogen levels cause breast cancer, why don't young women get breast cancer? Older women, right? They're the ones who are getting breast cancer. Why? Same thing with men and prostate cancer. Oh, give them testosterone, it's going to cause prostate cancer. No, it's not. if that were true, then 20-year-olds would have prostate cancer, then 60-year-olds wouldn't, right? It's a lack of this, and I think breast cancer is a lot like the prostate cancer. What we know with the prostate cancer now is that if you give somebody testosterone and they already have prostate cancer that's sensitive to androgens, then you can expose a cancer that you otherwise wouldn't have found, right? Or wouldn't have found for 5 or 10 more years, maybe. And I think breast cancer is the same way. I mean, just makes sense. And
how you're clearing it out of your liver and all of that, and
right.
estrone versus estradiol, and all of those sorts of things, those changes that happen. But totally.
And also every single mechanism that I just talked about that is reversing aging or slowing aging or whatever the phrase you want to use, every single one of those things is improving mitochondrial density, improving mitochondrial functioning, and doing.
Do you think that's at the core of everything?
It's doing what's called neovascularization and angioneogenesis and angiogenesis. So like it's improving blood supply, it's improving lymphatic flow, and it's improving mitochondrial density and mitochondrial functioning.
Wow.
Like, that's pretty much health, right? I mean, it's all of a lot of things have to work. So I'm sorry, what was your question?
The mitochondrial aspect of it, I truly believe that's the core. The core of so many of these diseases is if we can get our mitochondria, which is not easier said than done, but if we can get those working properly, and we can that's at the downstream, the most lowest level where we can, and again, sleep and things become the leverage point.
Right. And if you think about what all of the health crazes are moving towards, all of those things are doing that, right? So like the ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, both of these things are increasing mitochondrial density. They're both increasing mitochondrial function. They're both really anti-inflammatory. Anti-inflammatory leads to higher blood supply, better immune function, and immune function is anabolic, right? So it's like that's what's repairing and building things back up. The near far IR saunas doing same thing: mitochondrial density, mitochondrial functioning, hyperbarics, increasing oxygenation, increasing decreasing cytokines, inflammatory cytokines, increasing the oxygen saturation throughout all the cells, causing new blood vessels to form, carrying more, and it's all mitochondrial density. What else are we doing? Cold ice baths. Same thing. Ice baths are showing to increase of course they only increase they're going to increase your blood flow to save you from freezing, right? And how are you going to do that? It has to grow new blood vessels. And how's it got to do this? It's got to get more energy. Well, how's it going to do this? It's got to make more mitochondria. All of this stuff. And the other thing that it does is it increases things like BDNF. So like it's helping repair and restore our brains. And then that's leading to better hormone functions, because our brain is the hormone master. It's the orchestra leader. It's the maestro. Your pineal gland and pituitary. That's where everything is. That's where everything's coming from. That's where all the hormone modulation comes from.
Can I ask you a little bit, because I know that you have done hyperbaric work in your naval days, and I've got a hyperbaric right behind me there in the corner, and I'm very big on it. And like that was a cornerstone of my mother's rehabilitation after a massive aneurysm and brain injury. What's your take on it in regards to brain injuries, in regards to concussions, which is epidemic levels in our world, and also for things like dementias and Alzheimer's? I mean, without obviously being your absolute area of expertise, but what is your take on hyperbaric for all of these sorts of things?
So I think hyperbarics is actually going to turn out to be the most effective tool in the toolbox. I mean, I think you have to use all the tools.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
I have all the tools at my house, right? I have a sauna at my house, I have an ice bath at my house. I don't have hyperbarics. So I just actually came back from doing a couple of months of hyperbarics in Tampa, and I have a great recommendation for a guest if you wanted to talk to somebody who really knows hyperbarics. And he's a longtime friend of mine. I was in the Navy with him. He was a Navy master diver, and
please.
He just got his PhD in biomedical engineering, and he has a hyperbarics facility. He did the first research paper on the long haulers for COVID.
Oh yeah.
And reversing all the long hauling syndromes. He's done a paper on Lyme disease. He's doing a paper right now on dysarthria from strokes and all this. And he and I were investigating brain injuries, TBI.
Oh, wow.
And so I
definitely want to meet this guy.
Yeah. So I was the guinea pig. And then another SEAL friend of mine, because SEALs my age have the most problems, right? They're usually out at this age, but I have my best friend from SEAL training, and I'd say just my best friend overall. He was in the SEAL teams for 26 years. He did like 26, 27, 28 combat deployments. So, he's been in he's been blown up with a grenade. He's been, he's blind in one eye. He's been, he had 20 plus surgeries, and he's that's the norm. That's the norm of how guys come out when they're my age and they stay in the whole time. I don't obviously have nearly the kind of trauma that he does, so I wanted to bring him in too. But much like I did with the SEALs, I just said, we're just going to test everything, and we're just going to test everything we can think of. So I did pre and post EEGs. I did pre and post PET scans for consumption. I did pre and post psycho learning batteries of tests, testing your problem solving ability. I did a bunch of hormone stuff. I did I did genetic aging before, and I did all of this stuff. And then I just went and did a standard protocol, which is essentially 1 hour at depth. So 1 hour bottom time at 2 ATA with 100% oxygen, 5 days a week.
Wow.
Take Saturday and Sunday off, and did that for 8 weeks.
Yep. It was that 40 odd, 50 odd sessions. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just 40 sessions. And it's a big commitment. It's a big time commitment. It's expensive. But I just want to see if we can use it for the SEALs, because I still do a lot of work with guys who are getting out of the SEAL teams or are out of the SEAL teams, and they break down when it's a really hard life, and then they come out of it and they don't have their community, they don't have their compensatory techniques anymore. They're going to new jobs where they don't know the way around as much, and plus they've been gone most of their career. Now they're home with their wife and their kids, and it's a new thing. It's and it's hard for them. It's super stressful. Yeah. And so I do everything I can to help these guys out. And anytime there's a new modality, anybody tells me, not that hyperbarics is new, but the postulate that it was going to help with TBIs that were 5, 10, 15 years old, that's a new postulate. And so we're doing our best to test that. And we're about to do it again. I'm going to go to a 1 month.
I so want to hear the results of that, please, because I think it's the most underrated thing that I've ever come across, and and I've been studying for a number of years.
Absolutely.
I know what it did to my mum. My mum went from being like a baby, hardly any brain function, to being full driver's license, full life, full everything. She's walking and training at the gym every day, and that thing there in the corner was the catalyst for it. It gave me the stuff to do it. And I've got a family member with brain injuries, and I can't get him to get in there, repeated brain injuries from sport. And it's but can't you see what this is, how powerful this is? But it's a big time commitment, even when it's, sitting in your sister's house, but it's really important that people do this and get access to this. And, we just had a Sunday program, which is our current affairs, a big current affairs program on TBIs from rugby players over here, professional rugby players, and how many TBIs they get in a career, and they're coming out when they're ending up with dementias and Alzheimer's and brain injuries and mood changes and testosterone down in the toilet and all these sorts of things. And not once did anybody say hyperbaric. And I'm just like, oh, for God's sake, what do we have to do? I don't know why we're so bad at that. And under sort of all of the royal colonies, we're all, the Israelis and the Russians. The Israelis are onto it. The Russians are onto it. The Germans are onto it.
The Russians, I think, have, I want to say they have 180 some odd approved uses. Israelis are like 116. Yep. We're at 14. And then we just added one like a few months ago. We only had 13.
Hallelujah.
And half of ours are really the same thing. It's just like nuances of the same thing. And it's just, we don't get to use it very much. And when I was in the SEAL teams, even, it was super hard for me to get it for wound healing, although it's like the most obvious use for it. And I would want to put guys in there after surgery, and it was like pulling teeth every single time. I had to fight them. I had to fight the machine to get guys in there, and it's a huge difference, obviously.
Are you aware of the work of Dr. Paul Harch? HBOT.com is his website. He's done a hell of a lot in the hyperbaric space. Check him out. HARCH, Dr. Paul Harch.
No, I don't know.
Real expert in this area. And just on that point, about the machine, the medical machinery that we have in our Western world, and New Zealand is very similar to the States. What the hell are they doing? Like, why are we still in this in this disease-based system? Like, where we are only, like you were talking about ranges before, and these guys were still in the normal ranges, but they were having symptoms. Thyroid is another classic example of people that are not being picked up.
Right. Yeah, and all the thyroid are up too.
Yeah, and why? I've just been through a journey, which my listeners know, with my father, who developed sepsis after a massive operation, and I won't go into the details. But I was trying to get intravenous vitamin C, and he was dying, and I couldn't. It was they had no other options. Where I've got scientist friends, doctors who were giving me the clinical evidence to present to the ethics committees and all these things while I'm fighting for his life, and he's dying in front of my eyes, and I'm not allowed to give him intravenous vitamin C, which has been shown in a number of clinical studies to drop the mortality rate by 48-50%, and I wasn't allowed to do it. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going wrong with our system? I won the right, but it took me 15 days, and by then my dad had multiple organ failure, and I lost the battle for him. This system is just, I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but why? As somebody who's been through the standard medical, and then gone out and done your own, where are they going wrong? And is there a paradigm shift coming? Can you see a change coming?
Man, I really wish I could say yes to that, but I've become so disheartened after COVID. I don't know the politics there, but the politics here,
the same deal.
It's just mind-boggling to me. I'm sitting here going, first of all, hydroxychloroquine has been around for like 100 years. It's been around forever. It's over the counter in like 80% of the countries in the world. It's a very safe drug. There's almost no chance it's going to cause anybody harm. So whether anybody believes that it was helpful at the beginning or not, you had teams of doctors who were actually doing the work, the clinicians saying this works. And then you have these researchers and politicians saying, there's not enough evidence of that. Use this and don't use that and do it.
But do a vaccine that's been untried on.
There's a doctor out here. She's a doctor and a lawyer. She got thrown in jail for giving somebody hydroxychloroquine.
You're kidding me.
Prescribing hydroxychloroquine. She spent 4 days in jail. They kicked in her house. They kicked in the door of her house with a SWAT team with body armor and all their weapons, and rushed her and arrested this little 100-pound woman and put her in jail. Didn't let her call a lawyer or anything. It was Gestapo
stuff. That's evil. That's
unbelievable. I've never, there's never been anything in the news cycle that carried the news cycle to the extent of COVID period, but any really big event that I had any expertise in. So COVID was kind of the first time that the big nation focus was on something I knew about, right? I'm not a virologist, but I know how the immune system works. And I know what viruses are. I know the life cycle of them. I know how this works. I know how medicines work. I have some expertise, and I can read what's out there, and I can learn it really quickly. Yeah. And I was amazed at how dishonest and inaccurate the media was. And it's probably that way for everything. Just I don't have enough expertise to realize that when everything else is going on. And so I've just become really disheartened.
Me too.
That woman who got arrested, she was running something called the Frontline Doctors, and her and a bunch of other doctors went to the Capitol, and they held this press conference, and they told them, here's the evidence. This is all like, here's the evidence of the medicine. Here's the safety of the medicine. Here's what we've been finding clinically. We want to urge all doctors to do this. And the FDA cracked down and told people they couldn't do it. I, as a medical doctor, could not call a pharmacist and tell them to prescribe hydroxychloroquine to my patient. A pharmacist could tell me no. A pharmacist said, no, that's against the law.
To a doctor. And ivermectin is the other one. Have you?
Ivermectin is exactly the same way.
You know, what the hell? And fluvoxetine.
And then these doctors have had a website where they've been making videos. They've been posting with their videos all of their references, all the clinical. They're only using peer-reviewed studies. They're going through mechanism, historical stuff. They're going through new stuff, and they're posting it on there. Amazon just shut their website down.
Yep.
And just nope, took it away from them.
Have you seen Dr. Robert Malone's, where he was the founder of mRNA, and he was on the Dark Horse podcast with Brett Weinstein?
And I heard him on that.
I mean, okay, it was a really long interview and really in depth, but the thing was, this was censored. I watched them take it down, and I watched other people keep putting it back up. And then now they've gone over to a platform called Odyssey, which that can't be censored because it's on the crypto thing, which is like, but why when this is science? I know why, but like the science is there, the clinical evidence is there. This is a safe. Ivermectin's been on the market for 40 something years, 30 to 40 years. I don't know exactly, but it's off patent. Yeah. Nobody can make money out of it. And then if they have a therapeutic, they can't do the vaccine under the emergency law.
I've heard that postulate. I think it's very realistic but the other side of it is that if there's one thing that's been proven in the last year and a half to 2 years in America, is that the powers that be can do whatever the hell they want to. Yep. So they could have approved emergency use even if there were 10 treatments because they just wanted to, because they just do whatever they want to do right now. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, that's against the law. Tough. We're going to do it anyway.
We want to make some billions out of something, so we're going to do it anyway.
I don't know. I'm very disturbed by it. But I would say 10 years ago, I was really excited that there was going to be a paradigm shift. I've been waiting for it to happen. I don't know why it doesn't happen. Like I said, I started studying all this stuff around 2009 and going, well, man, this makes a lot more sense. And now, but I'm not saying that Western medicine is all bad, because if you're talking about somebody who's on death's door, or somebody who just got run over by a bus, or somebody who's severely sick, yes, Western medicine is great. But to keep people from getting severely sick and to keep people aging well and to perform well, that's a total different ball game. And that's not what the medical professionals are trained to do. And the ones that are trained to do that get marginalized. They aren't the real doctors. They're like, the naturopath isn't a real doctor over here. It's like, you're kind of like a doctor, but we're going to put you in this little box. And
second class citizen.
You're second
not a
class
real
citizen.
Thing.
And if there's one thing that I've proven to myself over this, over a decade I've been doing this now, is that most of my value is being a coach. I'm a doctor, but I pretty much coach people in lifestyle change. Like that's 90% of what I do is I get people to change their behaviors.
No one can make money out of that.
Then I give hormones, and then I give peptides, and then I give supplementations, and then we do little gadgets that you want to monitor everything about yourself and learn, monitor your heart rate variability and your sleep and all that, and you want to get every piece of data and continuous blood glucose, do whatever you want. Do all that stuff. That's where. Let's get you sleeping well. Let's get you eating whole foods and no junk. Let's get you exercising to the level that is appropriate for your fitness level currently. And let's get your stress hormones down and get your mood and thinking all in line with some mindfulness training or whatever you do with that. And that takes 9 months.
Yep, exactly. And it takes time, it takes massive effort, and it takes behavioral change, which people just don't want to do behavioral change because it's much easier to take a pill. It's much easier to take something simple. And I mean, that's just the way humans are. We want it easy. Give me a pill.
And there's great salesmen telling them that they just eat this superfood this little spirilla or like whatever, this weird bacteria we found in some cave under the Amazon, like this is the key. It's like, oh really? Nobody's ever been able to use it before, and it's the key now. I see, that makes sense. And people want that magic bullet, and it's hard for some people. I mean, I'm fortunate there's never really been that hard for me. I'm just not somebody who's had a lot of hunger cravings. Like I don't really crave bad food. It's easy for me to eat a good diet. And
there's a lot of genetic factors and all in these things. And there's when you look at our evolution, then, it makes sense that we go after fat and sugar and salt because that's what we didn't have enough of. And so
that's what protects you from famine right. And that's
so we're going. But we need to understand how the big food industry then is tapping into those addictive mechanisms in our brain to make us want more. You can't eat one chip. I mean, anybody knows who's eaten opened a packet of chips. You can't eat one chip. You're going to eat the whole packet. You know.
I call them crisp. I thought you called them crisp.
No, we call them chips.
Yeah. So I actually have this postulate on where donuts and coffee came from. Anyone hear it?
Yeah.
So, So what we were saying, I was saying earlier. If I don't get enough sleep tonight, so I don't recover, I don't get the right deep sleep, my anabolic hormones don't change around, my insulin sensitivity shifts, my appetite regulation, ghrelin and leptin, my fat metabolism regulators, all of that's off because I didn't sleep well, right? And so I wake up the next morning and I have high stress hormones because I didn't get enough sleep, and I'm using stress hormones to get through the day. Mm-hmm. And another thing that happens when you're asleep is you flush the toxins out of your brain. And
yes,
I use the word
lymphatic.
Yeah, the lymphatic flow, right? And I use that word sparingly, but and part of the fuel partitioning and regeneration fuel source, one of the things that we're doing is we're replenishing ATP, right? Mm-hmm. So ATP is a triphosphate adenosine with 3 phosphates on it, and then it goes down to ADP and AMP and then just A. Mm-hmm. And adenosine binds to areas of your brain and tells your brain we're exhausted. We burn all this out. We need to sleep. And that's what we call sleep pressure. Yep. That's the drive that just makes you want to crash. And you know this well from being an athlete and pushing yourself to the extent that you can lay down on a cactus and fall asleep. You're just so damn tired. And you say, gotta sleep. And it only takes a few hours to flush that adenosine out, right? Mm-hmm. And then, if you have enough stress hormones, epinephrine, norepinephrine, all that, you can get up and go again. So our insulin sensitivity goes down, especially in our fat cells, and then our leptin sensitivity goes down. And so we're convinced we need to actually store more fat. And then we still have adenosine, and the way caffeine works, right? Caffeine blocks the adenosine receptors, right? Yeah. And so your body now believes that it's starving. The only reason we're the only animal on the planet that sleep deprives ourselves on purpose. Every other mammal, the only time they will ever sleep deprive themselves is if they're being pursued, if they're being preyed upon, or if they're starving to death. If they're starving to death, they need to go further to forage for food. And it shuts off the prefrontal cortex. It makes you take more risks. You'll eat novel foods, try some things that might keep you alive that you wouldn't otherwise try. So you wake up essentially with your body convinced that you're starving. One, you deprived yourself of sleep. So every day you wake up without enough sleep, there's some trigger in your brain that's saying, are we starving? Are we being preyed upon? Like, what's the threat? Like, there's a threat on us, right? Yeah. And now you have all this appetite regulation and fat metabolism. All these regulators are off. Your body's convinced that you're starving. And what do you need when you're starving? You need glucose right now, and then you need a bunch of fat, right? And what is a donut? It's fried glucose, right? So it's like a glucose pill fried in fat. And then you drink coffee to displace the adenosine.
It makes sense. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, so I think that's where coffee and donuts come from. That's Kirk Parsley's Theory 101. Like, I don't know, do with it what you want. Never been published.
No, but that's brilliant work. That's a brilliant deduction. And it's so true. And then we take more coffee to keep ourselves going, and then we cause less adenosine to come, and then, we can't get to sleep.
This is one of the most beautiful things. So I was actually doing a sleep lecture with three other sleep experts of all different fields. There's some psychiatrists there and some sleep practitioners that do CPAP, sleep disease, like actual sleep specialists. And we were all going to the series of lectures during the day and we're waiting around for our car to come get us, and we're sitting in the lobby, and the lobby had a Starbucks. And they just happened to have like propped up on one of those little poles with they slide the menu in, and it was just sitting right next to the bench we were sitting at. And it had all the nutritional information of their drinks. And I'm sitting there looking at it, and I go, oh my gosh, and I'm pointing, I'm like, look at this. And they're all looking, and like, oh my gosh, that explains a lot. So when you look at caffeine intake or the effects, the beneficial effects of caffeine intake is on what we call a hormetic curve, right? So it's like more is better until more is worse, right?
Yeah.
It's like curve like this. And when it starts getting worse is about 200 milligrams.
Yeah,
so
which is what, 2 cups of coffee?
It's not even 2 full cups of drip coffee, right? And so after that, though, you actually get the exact opposite effect. So caffeine actually makes you start feeling more tired.
Wow.
And Starbucks has these 800 calorie coffees.
Wow.
That 100% of the calories are from sugar, right? Because they have syrups and whatever in them and creams.
Holy
and then
crap.
with 600 milligrams of caffeine. So what happens when you drink 600 milligrams of caffeine, you're sitting there like, I'm feeling better. I'm drinking this over time, right? And then I finish my coffee. And a couple hours later, I feel awful. And what do I think I need?
Coffee.
A cup of coffee. Go back and get another one.
And people don't equate that. And then they don't understand how long it takes for the caffeine to be processed out of the body. And then 12 hours later, they're not going to sleep, and they're thinking they haven't equated it to the 3rd cup of coffee that they had today.
Yeah, they have no sleep pressure like we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
They've blocked out the adenosine receptors. Plus, it's led to some stimulation of stress hormones, and their stress hormones are too high to sleep.
And on that point, when I was talking about my dad before, and I was in the hospital with him for, it was 16 days, we were fighting for his life. And that time I had maximum 2 hours sleep a day, because I was just there at the hospital, advocating, protecting him, wasn't leaving his side. As if I could stand up, I was there. After 16 days, I was diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
Like my blood sugar levels were through the roof. And all of my and that led to a whole lot of downstream effects that I'm still unpacking now, and it's now a year later. This is how quickly it can happen. I mean, in a time like that, you've got to push. It's the same when you're doing ultra marathons. I ran ultra marathons 25 years doing crazy long distance stuff. When I ran through New Zealand and I was running 500 kilometers a week, I got fatter. Like, go figure that one out. Because there was over, I don't know how many calories I was burning a day. It was in excess of 10,000 calories a day or more. And I wasn't getting anywhere near that calories in. And yet my body got fatter, my composition changed, my hormones went down the shitter, all of these things. And like, we think that the more we train, because this is another argument that I have a lot with my athletes that I train, is that, more is always better when it comes to exercise. And that's not true.
Sometimes more is just more. And often if you're sleep deprived, more is worse for sure. Like you don't really need to do any exercise. You just need to stay active until you've recovered, and then you can exercise again. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. When you have, if you when we were talking before we started the recording, I was telling you that I tampered with, I dabbled in trying to do some triathlons and marathons and things like this, and I just wasn't well suited for it. But definitely the fattest I've ever been in my life.
Wow.
Unquestionably, like I just wasn't suited for it, and it was too much stress.
And it was causing your body to put on everything. Fat. Wow.
And so I was broken down. I was losing my hair. I had a first time in my life I've ever had a belly.
Wow.
I've had plenty of times where I have like a 6-pack abs, but never had to get actually. I'm like, where did this come from? Never had this before, and I was still pretty young. I was like 35 at that time. I know for a fact that there's research, it's not all tissues, but some of your tissues, the insulin sensitivity is decreased by 30% just by losing 2 hours of sleep, one night of 2 hours of sleep. So you go from, say, sleeping 8 hours, you sleep 6. If you're pre-diabetic, you're waking up diabetic.
Yeah.
If you're normal, you're waking up pre-diabetic probably. Yep. And then if you do that for several nights in a row, you might actually be driving yourself into diabetes. within a week or two. Like, you don't really know, and not a lot of people, track themselves that much.
Yeah.
For us to know that, certainly, but again, it's super complex because there's all sorts of hormonal regulations and genetics and vascular flow and activities and diet, and there's a lot of things going into that. But as a general rule, you can say testosterone, if you lose 2 hours of sleep, testosterone's 30% lower, growth hormones 30% lower, inflammation is 30% higher, leptin sensitivity is down 30%, insulin sensitivity is down 30%. And this is in one night. You've lost 2 hours. You've only lost 25% of your sleep. And you're losing 25 to 30% of the benefit of sleep. No big surprise there, right?
So 6.5 hours a day, like the average, person, I reckon, probably gets 6.5. I don't know what the stats are, but 6.5 to 7 hours a day. How many people?
America's just dropped under 6 in the last year. But when I started this in 2009, it was 6.5, 6.45, I think.
And we think that's enough. That's close enough.
Yeah.
It's not close enough.
No.
We need 8 hours.
That's like saying, well, I only need 2,800 calories a day, so 35 is close enough. I'll stay lean, right? No, it's like, like that doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
So I mean, it's
so
it's best to get as much as you can possibly get. And if 6.5 is all you can get, and I understand that some people's lives are that way, this isn't to bash the individual. It's a cultural problem. It's not an individual problem.
No, it's a cultural.
In some cases it is, but in most cases it's a cultural problem. They've grown up believing that sleep is for the weak, and lazy people sleep more, and really productive people get up early,
at 5 a.m.
handle at both ends, and to get all the work done. And they're the high achievers, and that's who you want to be. And they're going to make the money.
Yep.
And they're the sexy ones. They're going to marry the good spouse, and they're going to have the beautiful kids. And because they're getting after it, and you're lazy, just sleeping 8 hours a day. And people buy into that, especially like I chose probably the worst two professions in the world, being Steals are like, that's a total luxury, man. That's for weak people, and you get all the sleep you need when you're dead, right? Not saying. And then medical school, same thing. It's like you're in the hospital, like sleep. You aren't getting a sleep. Like there's people's lives on the line here. Go make some bad decisions, And I mean, it's a crazy world. And I tell you, people pay a lot of money to work with me. And I'm not saying that to be braggadocious. I'm saying for the point being, it's hard to get to work with me, right? There's a waiting list. I seriously screen people because I don't want to work with someone who's going to be a pain in my ass. And I'm not working with anybody who's not super motivated, and you have to pay me a lot of money because I don't work with very many people. I spend a lot of time with each person. And the hardest thing, even though I'm known for sleep, the hardest thing for me to coach people to do is to sleep. I mean, I could tell them they'll do anything, like they're ready to do anything. When I say sleep 8 hours a night, that's when they're like, whoa, hold up, right? Because they don't.
It's the third of my life.
Right. I'm like, I want you to do yoga 2 hours a day, exercise 2 hours a day, eat nothing but kale. They're like, okay. And I'm like, I want you to sleep 8 hours a day. It's like, whoa, I can't do that.
And you're known for the sleep stuff.
I'm like, that's the most important part. But it's hard. There's a lot of social conditioning around that. Most people know they don't eat well. Most people know they don't exercise enough. Most people know they're too stressed. It's hard to convince people they aren't sleeping well.
And what about our kids? Like our kids are going to school early, and what sort of damage are we doing to our kids by making them? And adolescence is even worse, because in adolescence your body clock changes. Can you just speak briefly to that, and then we will wrap up because I am taking up a lot of your time.
I actually did a 5-hour lecture, 8 hours a day for 5 days in a row. In Germany, I was lecturing the student, or the faculty, the counselors, the coaches, and the teachers of the school systems for the American kids that were in overseas, military kids that are, and so I was lecturing all of this, and that's when I really dove into the research. I didn't know a lot of this before, and this was probably 6 or 7 years ago. But what we're doing to our kids is tragic. It's way worse than what we're doing to ourselves as adults. It's way worse.
Wow.
the really concerning thing is that obviously a kid's brain isn't fully developed, right? That's primarily what those 18 years are about. It's not nearly as much about the physical as it is about the mental. And one of the last things to form is the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part like from my temples forward over my eyes, like that little wedge. And that is the part that makes us the smartest animal on the planet. That is what we call the, Robert Sapolsky calls the simulator. It allows us to simulate things. We don't actually have to do them to figure out if they're a good idea, right? I don't need to jump off my roof to know if it's a good idea or not. Yeah. I've never jumped off the roof of my house before, and I can guarantee you it's a bad idea. It's like 30 feet to the ground. I'm going to get hurt. There's no way I'm going to do it. I don't have to do it to know that's a bad idea. I don't have to flip my boss off to know that I'm going to get fired if I flip my boss off, right? And like all of these behavioral gates, that's all prefrontal cortex. Also, all of our willpower is prefrontal cortex. So your ability to have a plan and stick on your plan relies on you going, I want the future. I want what my plan will get me in the future more than I want the immediate gratification right now. That's all willpower. That's 100% prefrontal cortex. Wow. As soon as your prefrontal cortex goes away, you start negotiating that out of the way. Yeah, it's not that big of a deal. It's only one piece of cake. And like I'm still going to lose that 15 pounds before my wedding or whatever people's goals are, right? And our problem solving ability, our verbal fluency, our ability to recognize other people's emotions when we're talking to them, our ability to actually communicate, listen, and understand what they're saying, our ability to regulate our own emotions and our own speech and communicate effectively. All of that is prefrontal cortex. This is the social part of our brain. Well, guess when that part's forming?
When you're a child.
Adolescence.
Yeah.
And what else happens in adolescence? What else happens in adolescence? There's a phase shift in circadian rhythm, and the kids need to stay up later and wake up later. That's just the way their circadian rhythm has shifted. There's nothing you can do.
They're not lazy. They're not being lazy teenagers.
Right. And instead, we're waking them up earlier as they get older. And like, you know, these kids are having to get to school at 7:15 in the morning, which means they're getting up at 6:15. They're probably not falling asleep until 1 a.m. Right. And it's worse because they don't just need 8 hours of sleep. They need 9. About 10 hours of sleep. Wow. So they're getting half as much sleep as they need. And then we're shoving them off to school and we're saying, why are you misbehaving in school? Why aren't you paying attention? Well, it would be the same thing as if
you got ADHD. We're going to give you some drugs.
You have ADHD. It would be the same as if you and I had to get up at 2:30 in the morning and go be at work at 3:30 in the morning, and we're expected to learn. We're expected to be able to communicate effectively and behave well and pay attention and be energetic. Like we couldn't do it. No, kids can't do it either, and we're interfering with the development of their brain. And the prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed until you're at the earliest, maybe 20 for women. Women's brains form a little faster. But it's up to 25 years old, and a lot of men are right at that mark, 23 to 25, and about a quarter of the women are still 23 to 25. So the most formidable years are high school and college and early employment. And what do people do in early employment? They go hang out with their friends. They go to the bar. They drink. They have fun. They watch movies. They go to bed. They get up early. They go to work. They do the same thing every day. So they're the most sleep deprived years are the most formidable years of the brain development.
God. And then we wonder why depression and suicides and accidents and all of these things that happen to our youth in disproportionately is a part of that, a part of it at least. Because of all this.
There's this fascinating new field in medicine called chronobiology.
Yeah. I'm right into chronobiology. Yeah.
And what they've discovered is it probably, we don't know for sure, but it's probably every psychiatric disease and probably every psychological severe flare-up or whatever you want to call that. Episodes of cycle break that's always preceded by sleep deprivation.
Wow. So depression.
Everybody who's depressed didn't sleep well before they became depressed, and now the depression's about half of them it's making them sleep a lot more, about half of them it's preventing them from being able to sleep, so now they feel sleepy all day. Like anytime anybody has a schizophrenic break, there's a period right there. People with bipolar who have, before they go into their frenetic phase, right?
Yep.
They have a period of sleep deprivation.
Yep.
And then after their manic phase, they go into their depressive phase, and that can actually lead, again, half of them are going to sleep less and half of them are going to sleep more. But there's always sleep regulation around it. And so the first book I read on chronobiology at some Ivy League hospitals, I think it was Harvard, one of those, Harvard, Yale, like Cornell, something like that. In their attached hospital, they took their inpatients, right? So their psychiatric inpatients, and all they did is get them out in the morning and get them to walk around the yard and do this. And it was amazing. I think it was at least 50%. It might have been 75% of their patients completely came off their medications.
Wow.
These are people who were inpatient. They had been on hardcore antipsychotic medication for years and maybe decades, and they get them not just decreased 100% off of medications by getting their circadian rhythm and chronobiology along.
Wow.
And it's deeper than I know. I haven't studied it really deep. I mean, we have the ultradian rhythms as well as the circadian rhythms, and so how all that aligns, I can't say like what's the neurophysiology going on to break people out of that. But again, does it really matter? It's lifestyle.
It's working and it's easy.
It's lifestyle again.
Try
it. It's the same damn thing. Like if they lived as hunter-gatherers today, they would get up when the sun came up and they would have to go out and do things, and they would be in the sunlight, and then it would get dark and they would get cold and they would fall asleep. So again, it's like lifestyle handles 95% of this.
Yep. And our ancient DNA, we just cannot escape our ancient DNA. And when we try to, we put people on drugs and we do all these interventions, why don't we try this stuff first? Why don't we try this basic stuff? When you look in hospitals with their 24-hour lights and they're beeping and they're waking people up all through the night, and all of these things with our sickest populations, just mind blowing to me.
It's the whole philosophy of how pharmaceuticals come about that's wrong. So take sleep drugs, for instance. So we talked earlier about Stilnox, right? So what that does, it acts like GABA, okay? So I told you that GABA is slowing down the brain. So when I get stressed out, when I start living in artificial light and, air conditioning and heating, and I've taken myself completely off the planet, right? Like I make it hot when it's cold, cold when it's hot, dark when it's light, light when it's dark. I do whatever the hell I want to do, eat stuff that's not even related to food. Like I can do whatever I want. I'm totally taking myself off this planet. Like mankind has got it all figured out. And then of course now I have sleep problems. All right, well, and then maybe I'm overstimulating myself. I'm watching movies or playing video games or going out to nightclubs or whatever it is. I'm overstimulating my brain and I can't get to sleep at night. Or I'm in bed and I'm going through divorce or bankruptcy or whatever. My brain's just racing and I can't slow down my brain. GABA's job is to slow down my brain. Well, my GABA's not doing it. So what does the pharmaceutical industry do? All right. So I have a receptor that binds GABA. I have GABA floating around my blood supply. It grabs this, pulls it into the cell, and it does what GABA does in that cell. And we'll say that's a 1. It does it. 1 GABA does an action of 1 on a scale from 1 to 10, 1. So now they come up with benzodiazepines, also act like GABA. They're GABA analogs. And what do? They bind for GABA. They bind that GABA receptor, it gets pulled in, and instead of doing 1 out of 10, it does 100 out of 10.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then they came out with the Z drugs and like, hey, we got this even better. Now this Z drug binds in here, the Stilnox binds in there, pulls it in there on a scale of 1 to 10, it does 1,000.
Holy shit.
Now I have this super physiologic effect because, in the pharmaceutical world, well, all we got to do is flip this switch. And if we flip this switch harder, people are going to sleep faster and we're going to win and we're going to sell our medication. That's the way they think about it. Instead of going, well, what if we relieve all the stress hormones that are keeping the GABA from working?
The natural. And
then we just use this GABA and the 1 does its job, because we've talked about the downregulator of receptors, right? Well, if a Z drug is 1,000 times more powerful than GABA, how many receptors are you going to have at the end of 6 months of using that?
Nothing. Bugger all.
1/1000th,
Yep.
right? It's pretty simple math. Like you're going to have 1/1000th.
Can you
And-
recover that? Can you upregulate those receptors again?
Well, I mean,
Or are you buggered for a long time?
It takes a while. So what I did with the seals, obviously I couldn't just take away their sleep medicine, medicine and say, suck it up, buttercup. Like I had to give them something. And so we came up with this concoction of these things to give them various reasons, and all the guys helped me figure out what worked the best. But I kept them on their sleep drug. So what I did is I had the pharmacy make their Stilnox into a serum.
Yep.
So 10 drops was a full dose. So they did 10 drops for a week, and then they do 9 drops per week, and then 8 drops per week. All the while, they're taking the sleep supplement as well, right? And they're getting good sleep every night. They're cutting out alcohol, and they've done their sleep hygiene, and they're doing everything to optimize their sleep. And over the course of about 6 to 8 weeks, they're completely off of it.
Marvelous.
And then all the receptor density is obviously back, and then they can just sleep fine after that,
Does that work for things, everything? Like, say, like, getting someone off antidepressants and, we're trying to cut like tablets down this much and this much and this much, and it's really hard because you don't, you can't chop a tiny tablet.
It is really hard, and it's really time consuming, and sometimes you have to bounce back because the side effects become too much, and it's really hard to titrate off of, especially antidepressants, because especially like most antidepressants now aren't just working on one system. So they aren't working on, say, like just serotonin. They're not, a lot of times they're working on multiple neurotransmitters. So you're downregulating receptors for lots of things. And the ratio of neurotransmitters matters just as much as the presence of them. And, so not everybody's the same, and so not everybody's receptors are coming back at the same speed, and not everybody's just sensitive to the same drug. So it's hard to know how to get off of things. And I've actually had 2 patients over my career just fail to come off of antidepressants. They just couldn't. We tried for the better part of a year, and it was too traumatic for them. Like they would have such bad side effects from getting off the medications that they're like, I'm just going to stay on.
Yeah. And you have to weigh it up.
And I did my best to coach them out of it, but at the end of the day, it's like I'm there as an advocate and a coach, so I don't demand anything of my clients other than they sleep. That's one thing I'm dogmatic about, but everything else is like, we're going to work with what you want to do, and we're going to build resilience and performance in whatever areas you want to. And you're going to eat, like if you want to be a vegetarian, you can be a vegetarian. You want to be carnivore, you can be a carnivore. I don't care what you want to do. We're just going to figure out how to get the right ratios for you of everything and get the best performance out of you. And maybe if your genetics are such that you would do better without meat, but you really love meat, and you're willing to take a little less performance, and I'd rather have meat than be 5% better. All right, that's up to you. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life.
Yeah. And Doc, you have developed a sleep remedy, which I've heard you say on other podcasts. It's not a miracle. It's just like it, but it does contain some of the things that will actually help us without damaging us. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's not, it's not a physiologic trick, right? It's not something like the sleep drugs. It's not, overdosing you on melatonin so that you're just washing out all of your wake-promoting neurotransmitters and you're just falling asleep anyway. So if you think about, we're talking about the hunter-gatherers, the cavemen, the way our ancestors lived. I said it takes about 3 to 3.5 hours after the sun goes down before people feel like falling asleep. Well, who in America spends 3 hours, or New Zealand spends 3 hours getting ready for bed? Nobody, right? Like one in a million, maybe, right? So all I try to do with my product is say, well, what would ordinarily concentrate over those 3 hours? What would happen? Well, as we said, the primary point would be we'd have this and just start this nation and keep melatonin, because it's not just like we'll fire the pistol once and it goes. It's like this, this is flowing around the brain and continually making changes all throughout the night. And then the other thing is GABA, right? And GABA, as I said, that slows the brain down, and that does the other part. The body temperature, not something I supplement with, do anything with, but the stress hormones, we need those to come down. Those should be coming down due to lifestyle, but maybe they're a little high. So phosphatidylserine is kind of like the only not straightforward thing but from your ultra marathons and so forth, I'm sure you know that decreases cortisol levels by taking phosphatidylserine. So if you look at the pathway for producing melatonin, it's tryptophan, the amino acid tryptophan, that becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. Then with the help of magnesium and vitamin D3, that becomes serotonin. Serotonin becomes melatonin.
Yep, and there you got your pathway. Without
that's all that's in my supplement. There's no serotonin in it, but there's tryptophan, 5-hydroxytryptophan, magnesium, vitamin D3, and a little bit of melatonin. There's some GABA in there, and then there's some phosphatidylserine to bring your cortisol down. It's just ratios that I worked out with the SEALs over. They were great patients to have because they were super motivated and they're really diligent. They'd take notes. They'd come in and report to me every day, and we just figured out the ratios of like, okay, it seems like we need a little more of this, a little less of that. I had no intention of making a product out of it. I was just helping them get off of their sleep drugs, and then they just harangued me into making a product out of it.
Because
they were like, "This is a pain in
take one thing."
It was a pain in their ass. They were having to go to 3 different stores. This is before Amazon. You could just order everything. They're having to go to 3 different health food stores, and this came in a 30-day supply, and that came in a 90-day supply, and this is capsules, and that was a powder, and this was a liquid. They couldn't travel with it, and so they're like, just make us something simple. And that's why I made the stick pouches. One, because I want to make it tea, because I want to create some sort of bedtime routine and ritual, like help you form something like that, not just sit in bed and pop some pills. So that's why I made it. That's one of the reasons. And then the other thing is those little stick pouches. Those things will last forever. Like they're
you can take it.
And they can just you need 5 days of sleep. You just throw 5 of those in your pocket and you're done, right? And you don't need to pack a bunch of different pills and all that. So so I really just made it for those guys, and then it surprisingly turned into a little side business that I never really intended. But.
Yeah, this is fantastic though, because and we'll put the links in the show notes, people, to get this, and because I have all those things, and I have to take all the pills currently, so right. and I don't know the ratios, whether I'm getting the ratios right, and if I'm doing it right, and right. I know I need extra support because I sort of live it, full bore like you probably do. So we can do with some extra help. So we will put the links in the show notes to the sleep remedy. But there's nothing physiological doses. There's nothing artificial in there that's going to cause you trouble. And that's the main thing when because people just grab to Ambien or Valium or those, types of things. Right. Because they're desperate, and I get that. But we can help ourselves with all the sleep routine things that we've mentioned: dark, cool, having a hot shower or cold shower, something changing your temperature, slowing your brain down, chamomile tea, all these things that we can do that are simple behavioral things. But adding that into the mix, I think, is a really key thing. Dr. Parsley, I've taken up so much of your bloody time, but I would love to have you back at some stage, because there was just more that I wanted to.
Yeah, there's a lot we didn't really get to talk about.
Yeah,
I'm always happy to do it. I don't know how long it took to schedule this one, but I think
not too bad.
I think I can get them done in a couple of weeks usually. I'm only doing maybe 2 a week right now. Like it used to be like 5 a week. Somebody always wanted me to do it, but I don't get as many requests now. I'm not as popular, so I've been doing about 2 a week. So
I think I think like I've worked with I've done this podcast for nearly 6 years. I've talked to experts in so many fields. Your wide-ranging experience, both in the SEALs and as a doctor, is pretty extensive. So I think you might be getting a lot more. And I think I just really enjoyed this conversation because it's helped clarify a lot of things for me. And it's really put, I think, the number one thing that I've also come to the conclusion of in a roundabout way, that sleep is our biggest leverage point, not exercise, not food, not anything else, but sleep. And it's not an easy one for us to just click and do, but we can help ourselves. So I think that the work you're doing is absolutely marvelous. And I would love to get your friend on who's in the hyperbaric, because that's definitely one of my things that I'm good on promoting as well, big on that. So yeah, any final things that you would like to share with the audience, to just, any last bits of wisdom from Doc Parsley?
Well, so with specifically with sleep, since that's what we talk the most about, and that's what people mostly want to hear me talk about. But specifically with sleep, again, I just like to reiterate that it is a really simple process, and the thing that gets in the way the most is all of these fears and concerns about doing everything perfectly. When you're designed to do it, like really all you need to do is convince yourself it's really important, and then just start with a bedtime ritual, right? Like the sleep hygiene stuff you can look up, but again, all you're doing with it is you're decreasing the blue light in your eyes. You can do it with glasses, you can do it by changing your light bulbs, you can do it by getting rid of the light and doing candles. You can put computers, programs that get rid of blue light. There's all sorts of things you can do. Get rid of the blue light, decrease the stimulation, lower your body temperature. That's sleep hygiene. There's a million ways to do that. And then of course, part of lowering your stress is just slowing down your thinking. You can't work on your computer until 9:59 and get in bed at 10 and think you're going to be asleep, right? It doesn't work that way. You have to slow everything down, just like you do with a little kid. The other metaphor I give a lot is like, if you've ever had kids or ever been a kid, you'll remember there's like this 45-minute protracted period to get a kid ready for sleep.
Yep.
We still need that as adults. We just don't think we need that. And it doesn't need to be as elaborate, but it's the same thing. What are you doing with a kid?
Put them in the bathtub.
Right, you're slowing him down. You don't let your kid bang trucks together and then throw them in a bed and turn off light and walk out and think it's going to work, right? Not going to work. So stop roughhousing, slow down the activity, maybe watch a television show or, do a puzzle or whatever it is. And then after you do that, you put them in the bath. Why are you putting them in the bath? Relaxing them and you're lowering their body temperature, right? You don't give them a 98-degree bath. You might give them an 85-degree bath, right? Or, I don't know Celsius for that, but so you're not giving them a body temperature bath. It's something below, so you're lowering the body temperature. Then what do? You get them out of the bath and you put them in really comfy jammies and you put powder all over them. Decreases sensation, right? Now they're not feeling labels, not feeling zippers, not feeling anything touching them. So now they're that's one less sensation. Now you put them in a room, you make sure they're safe, they're in a soft bed, there's nothing sharp poking them, they feel comfortable, they're feeling comfortable next to you. You start reading them a story. What's the best kind of story? The story they already know. Something rhythmic, something predictable, like Dr. Seuss. That has its cadence. They know everything that's coming. And then they just sit there and they're relaxing. You're slowing down their brain. Their body temperature's lower. There's no sensation. The lights are low. You're not putting in loud music. They're not moving around a bunch. And now they start feeling like they're going to sleep, and you convince them they're going to be safe, and you walk out. Like, it's the same. We need
you turn the lights off.
You don't have to wear onesies, but adults don't need onesies, but everything else, like, it's all the same. We need all the same stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that trying to get your kid to sleep and obviously keep psychologically safe, but having them in a dark room without a nightlight if possible. I don't know if you know Professor Huberman, Andrew Huberman. He was talking about the other day the light getting to the eyes of the child, the night lights and things that we have on for kids, and actually causing myopia, short-sightedness in children as well. Like, that's another thing besides the whole sleep rhythm thing. But that was an interesting one as well.
Oh, one final thought. If anyone in your audience is specifically having problems with stress, they know they're having problems with stress, or they suspect they're having problems with stress. I'm sure you'll post it in your show notes, but my website, docparsley.com. There's a downloadable PDF in there. I think it's docparsley.com /stress. And there's a downloadable PDF. It gives you a whole program for how do you decrease stress around sleep.
Okay. All right. I'm downloading that myself.
It would take me an hour to describe it. So I just point people towards the PDF.
Okay. People, get on Doc Parsley's website, get that stress download, that free download. Check out Doc Parsley's sleep remedy. Make sure you start to implement all of these things and give us some feedback. Let Doc Parsley know what you think about all of this, because I'm sure you'll be interested in feedback from people as well. Doc Parsley, thank you so much for your time. I really thank you for all the work you're doing and the amazing research and everything. It's just absolutely amazing.
Well, Appreciate having you on. It does good to know anything if I don't get to share it to people, and I'm too lazy to have my own podcast. So.